A retailer may be paying $75 a foot for a leased store, but do they have capacity to pay more? Or would they even renew at the same lease rent? The answer may be in occupancy cost ratio. In this video, I'll explain the concept of occupancy cost ratio through an Excel model. In the end, I'll explain how it is used by a landlord and a tenant to make strategic decisions. Now, let's start by understanding what is occupancy cost. The occupancy cost is an all-in cost a retailer pays to occupy its leased space. It's calculated as base rent plus percentage rent plus recovery. That's the total outflow for a lease. Now, the occupancy cost would be different for different locations and will also vary significantly by the size of the retailer. Therefore, it is important to convert it into a ratio. The occupancy cost ratio is calculated as total occupancy cost divided by the gross sales from the store. An occupancy cost ratio of 6% implies that the tenant pays 6% of its sales as rent to occupy the store. Let's look at this through an Excel model and understand better. The first section of the model includes a few assumptions which are needed to calculate the cost. It includes the area occupied by the store, the gross sales which are expected from the store. This is an important metric. The base rent that is paid, the percentage rent rate, how is the breakpoint for the percentage rent, and any recovery related information. Now the occupancy cost builds up by simply adding up all the components of payouts from tenant to the landlord, which starts from base rent, includes percentage rent, and all the recoveries that are paid by tenant to the landlord. Now this lease may have a headline rent of $75 a foot, but it translates to an occupancy cost of $99 a foot, which is a more relevant number to understand a feasibility of a lease. Within this, there is a component of percentage rent. Let's unpack that a little bit. To calculate percentage rent, start with the base rent and calculate natural breakpoint. Natural breakpoint is your base rent divided by the percentage rate of the percentage rent rate. You get the natural breakpoint. In case the lease specifies a manual breakpoint, you might want to use the manual breakpoint, but otherwise the natural breakpoint becomes your breakpoint for the lease. Any sales that cross the breakpoint are over and above the breakpoint are the sales which will be used to apply the percentage rent rate. Now in this case, the annual sales are 5 million, which is above 4.2 million by around $700,000. So 7% of this $700,000, which is $50,000, is the percentage rent for the lease. We use this $50,000 to calculate the occupancy cost here. Now, once you've calculated the occupancy cost, it is important to understand what is the ratio and is it healthy or not. To calculate the occupancy cost ratio, we just divide the total occupancy cost by the annual gross sales and get the ratio. Now, this occupancy cost ratio of 7.9% indicates that a tenant is paying almost 8% of its annual gross sales as rent to occupy this store. Next, we should compare this occupancy cost ratio for this particular tenant with benchmarks. And a benchmark for each type of store might be different. A grocery store might have a benchmarked occupancy cost ratio of 5%, for which, if this store was our grocery store, this lease is expensive. For a jewelry store, the occupancy cost benchmark for a market could be 15%. If this was a jewelry store, this lease might be very affordable. Based on the benchmark, we calculate if this lease is healthy or not. And then we also calculate a few metrics which are important for strategic decision making. Now you see the first metric here is maximum affordable occupancy cost at benchmark. Now we are reverse calculating from the benchmark of 15% and the sales of 5 million. What is the rent that this tenant can pay. It comes out to $750,000, which is well above the $396,000, which is the total occupancy cost in the current lease structure. It is it gives a cushion and a headroom of $354,000 for the tenant to still be viable. And this also gives out information to the landlord that they might increase the rent to still stay within the headroom, but get some more uh, get some more payments out of the tenant and still have the tenant viable to be at the location. So on the reverse side, from the tenant side, it is very important to understand how much sale would they need to ensure that they have a healthy occupancy cost ratio for the location. Their current occupancy cost is $396,000. If we divide that by the benchmark rate, which is 15%, you get 2.6 million. So if they make 2.6 million from this location, this lease is still viable for them. They would be at a 15% benchmark. Now, moving to the next tab, I'll show you how this translates into a larger property. The first tab was totally focused on one single tenant, but when we are analyzing a property, you'll have to see and ensure that all the tenants are viable and have a healthy occupancy cost ratio. In this table, there are several different types of tenants, and we have used the same method to calculate the occupancy cost ratio and marked each of the tenants as a healthy or a tenant to be washed out or a stressed tenant. Now, why do we need to watch out for tenants having a higher occupancy cost ratio? Is because in case the ratio is higher, there is a risk that this tenant might not renew the lease when the lease comes for renewal. This also is an important tool for a tenant portfolio. For example, the tenant is a large chain and they want to optimize their stores and see and include only the stores which are performing better. The indicator that they'll use is the occupancy cost ratio. They will look at the occupancy cost ratio for each of the stores, all the locations, benchmark it with that location type, and see which are the locations which are stressed, which are possible contenders for a closeout.